Over the past 2 or 3 decades, modern Western society has finally started to accept and popularize some of the teachings and practices from our most ancient traditions and religions. Nowadays, you can go to almost any city or search videos online and find courses that teach yoga or meditation. And words like awake or mindfulness have been getting tossed around more and more since the 2000s. And really, these words are often tossed around casually because many people don't know the meaning or the ultimate purpose of these practices. Mindfulness meditation, advertised in popular culture, has this gestalt to it, like it's this new and innovative thing that we should include in our trendy self-care routine. But really, all of the esoteric practices we're finally rediscovering are ancient and timeless. And many of them are just Sutrayana or Shravakayana level. In Buddhism, these are the most basic, elementary things like mindfulness. And this is all okay if we just want to take classes and balance all of our energy centers, our chakras, or learn how to relax and stabilize our mind, and live a healthier, stress-free life. But for those of us who are suffering deeply and chronically, and we want to find a way out, we can't keep going on like this, and we just want to let go of our grudges and traumas and depression and stress, then we are ready to learn what these words yoga and meditation and mindfulness really mean. And this brings me to something the author and senator Al Franken once said, which was that it's easier to put on slippers than to carpet the whole world. And this simple advice perfectly reflects the attitude that all spiritual traditions teach, that it's better to learn how to make yourself more resilient to the world than to constantly fight and control and change all of the outside things in your life that are bothering you. That would otherwise be a constant struggle and nearly impossible. Buddhism teaches that there are 4 intrinsic facts about existence, which are known as the 4 Noble Truths. These are: 1. That life contains inevitable and ongoing suffering. 2. That suffering originates from causes and conditions. 3. That there is a dimension where suffering does not exist. And 4. That there is a means to the cessation of suffering. There is an end to suffering. Yoga and meditation, to their full extent, are the solutions to the 4th and last noble truth. There is a solution to end suffering. That is the sole purpose of meditation. It is to liberate one's own consciousness from samsara, or cyclic existence. So although it is true that meditation can grant us powers like astral projection, remote viewing, traveling through the 4th dimension in the jinn state, divination or prophecy, clairvoyance, clairaudience, and many other abilities, none of these are its ultimate purpose. So let's start with yoga. Whenever Westerners talk about yoga, the first thing that comes to our mind is that practice where we stretch and contort the body in all sorts of exotic positions. But this is really just one type of yoga, known as hatha yoga. In its entirety, yoga is a comprehensive and holistic practice, with many aspects, among which half of them have nothing to do with the physical body, but are rather observances to follow in order to live a spiritually conducive lifestyle. In other words, do not lie, do not steal, do not indulge, etc. Guru Patanjali was the author of the classical Yoga Sutras, which included the timeless Raja Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga teachings. Raja means royal, and Ashtanga Yoga translates as meaning the 8 limbs of yoga. Patanjali marked therein an 8-stage process through which the yogi must pass in order to experience yoga in its entirety. The final 3 steps of the 8 limbs of yoga are in fact meditation. The Bhagavad Gita also contains the greatest teachings on yoga. Swami Shivananda, explained that the term yoga comes from the root which means to join, or union. Patanjali described yoga as the suspension of all the functions of the mind, except perception and self-awareness. From this understanding, we can see how yoga is actually a psychological discipline. The purpose of yoga is to reintegrate the body and central mind with the soul, to unite with the divine, fundamental reality where suffering does not exist. Now, this reality or state of consciousness is far beyond our current human evolution, but it can be attained in one lifetime. And better yet, a person can begin to heal themselves within minutes of receiving insight in meditation. And from that insight comes understanding or comprehension. And from that comprehension comes a liberation of consciousness. At this point, you don't just feel better because you received the answer to a problem. You change fundamentally. It might be a fraction of a percent. It might be 1%. But the liberation of consciousness is what heals us, and it is a measurable and confirmable phenomenon. Now, the term mindfulness means to be mindful and self-aware of everything you perceive on a moment-to-moment basis. It's the ability to keep a continuity of self-awareness, or cognizance, all the time. So in other words, there is a clear distinction between doing something or experiencing something and knowing that you're doing it, being mindful and observing yourself doing or perceiving from moment to moment. The mindfulness meditation practices that have become more and more popular over the decade are not real meditation. They are merely elementary Sutrayana level practices designed to train and establish concentration. The ability to relax and concentrate and be mindful is a prerequisite for meditation. This is called in Buddhism shamatha. It means serenity or calm abiding. In its full sense, meditation is the state of perceiving with the consciousness fully activated and free of all conditioning. It is the ability to see all manifested things and sensations as they are, objectively. Consciousness can be in an active state, when we are paying close attention to something, or in a passive state, when we are receiving impressions such as sight and sound, but without very much awareness of it or ourselves. This happens when we get distracted, or when we get hypnotized by television, or caught up in fantasy and daydreams, or entranced by dreams during sleep. Meditation is not rooted in religious belief, or dogma, or theories, or myths. It is a pragmatic, practical, experiential phenomenon that we once had a greater ability to experience many centuries ago, but lost over the course of the Common Era due to our conditioning. So for us, we tend to consider meditation as a practice, because our mind is so conditioned that we constantly need to retrain ourselves to be able to perceive different kinds of impressions with that added self-awareness and clarity and objectivity that meditation offers. Nonetheless, meditation has been proven by thousands, and even adopted by the CIA and military forces such as the Navy SEALs. Karma, trauma, and the liberation from suffering. To see things as they are is crucial for our evolution. Because of how limited our consciousness is, we're not in the state of meditation. Many of us consider ourselves to be conscious creatures. We perceive, we think, we act, we make choices, so why not? But the fact is that we have consciousness at our level, and it's very limited. So most of the time, we are in a state of psychological sleep. For us, this means that we barely perceive our own physical world that we belong to. We're usually not aware of much. We can't pay attention for long periods of time before getting distracted, and it takes a lot of effort and energy just to pay attention. We rarely remember our dreams when we wake up every morning. We can't remember all the things we did or said last week, and we can't predict or see all the things that will happen in the future. And furthermore, our range of perception is also limited. We can't hear as much as a dog can. We can't see very well at night like cats can. And we can't see radiation waves like infrared or ultraviolet. So as a result, we interpret impressions, everything that comes into our senses, subjectively, based on our conditioning. And from this fact, we can see how all problems are really a matter of perspective and are relative to the level of perception a person carries. For example, the kind of physical punishment most of us can barely tolerate may not affect a Shaolin monk who is in a state of meditation. Or some of the emotional dramas that a teenager in high school faces regularly might be viewed as petty and insubstantial compared to a person like Batman, who has the whole weight of Gotham City on his shoulders. So it's the misperception of a conditioned consciousness that causes all of our confusion and problems, not the situation itself. Everyone sees things from a different point of view, and everyone is debating and disagreeing and arguing with each other. This is also why this humanity has become increasingly confused and violent and complicated over the centuries. And that last statement isn't just based on the teachings of the Dharma and evolution, but it's a fact that you can confirm for yourself if you look it up. The amount of slavery that's happening on the planet right now is more than it ever has been in history. Our water supply and air is more polluted than it ever has been. Most of our food is not organic anymore. Everything now is genetically modified and synthetic. So in Buddhism, when we talk about conditioning, we're usually referring to the ego, which is what we carry in our mind. Now, although we can agree that we can be influenced by external situations, like the way we were raised, the city we grew up in, the schools we went to, or the decade we were born in, the outside situations are never the root cause of our current circumstances. And we have this habit of blaming our parents or siblings or our schools or society for making us the way we are. But it's wrong. It's part of wrong view in the Eightfold Path. Because when we blame others for our suffering, we fail to recognize the interdependence in all things. This is why the Dalai Lama explained that if you want to untie a knot, you must first find out how it was tied. The causes of suffering is the ego itself, since the ego carries karma, previous action. We made ourselves the way we are through moment-to-moment choices, both in this life and previous lives. To cut through the illusory nature of life and see into the reality of all things is a matter of removing the conditioning that prevents meditation from happening. We are conditioned by our desires, our fears, our traumas, our memories, and attachments. This grasping quality of mind is the egoic perception that we developed because of previous action. So if we're tired of suffering and we're serious about healing ourselves, the answer will always be found by looking inward. If we're sincere and honest with ourselves and take responsibility over our circumstances, then we can investigate our problems directly and begin to understand and unravel the causes behind them. By observing and understanding scenarios this way, we are destroying defects in the mind, and thus changing and reducing our karma. Every time you comprehend something, you destroy a portion of your ego. So as a result, you're liberating free consciousness from the various levels that it was once trapped. Instead of feeling trapped in the situation, like there's no choice but to just suck it up or act on our ego and take revenge in some way, we can simply take the time out and transmute. Now, admittedly, the path to liberation is rough and it can be exhausting sometimes. For most of us, it's not easy to just be passive and ignore difficult people and situations all the time, regularly turning to meditation and other practices for some release. So a lot of us have resistance to that idea of being spiritual when we picture ourselves living like that. And yes, there will be times when we know what the right thing is to do because we received the true insight or because a guru or a spiritual teacher assured us what to do. And yet, we still feel like acting on our pride and vengeance and so forth. Of course, because we are so used to our old mindset where we think that it's okay to fiercely complain about our problems all the time, or get angry and yell at people. If I told you to just reframe situations all the time and look at things in this or that higher spiritual way, you probably wouldn't want to. And part of that is because we think it's too difficult to change our minds. We think it's impossible to get over our problems, especially serious things like childhood trauma. But if I were to tell you that actually, if you really work consistently at restraining your negative mind, and you devote yourself to meditation and other practices, then what will happen very soon is that you will actually start to reduce and destroy many of those negative regions in your mind that are creating that resistance in you. You will get used to difficult situations and become more and more resilient. Eventually, with perseverance, this is how we evolve into higher kingdoms of evolution. There is no other way to completely heal from a psychological trauma. There is no better or more thorough way to do this. It may feel like an odd, unusual alternative to turn to. And that's of course because society still hasn't widely accepted this practice. Meditation is the right thing to do. It's the proper way to heal. The first setback is that if your pride and anger or depression is holding you back from being happy, and if you don't reduce those aspects of your mind, then you may always be that way, angry and stubborn and depressed. And second, suffering is more complicated than just being stubborn or sad. If you don't heal your mind and even body through understanding and meditation, if you don't actually destroy the causes of your suffering by eliminating parts of your ego, percentages and fractions of it, then the situation you were burdened by in the past will just repeat again. It may be that right now you tend to experience the same problem in relationships repeatedly in this life. Or it may be that the problem will happen again a long ways down the road. Or what happens very typically is that if you were dealt with a very heavy and exceptional ordeal, then you're dealing with past life karma, which is generally paid once or twice in each lifetime, since karma is served to us in thirds. The recurrence of past life trauma will be more or less severe depending on how you've evolved over the course of your life. But creatures with ego are always in a state of devolution. So we tend to be slightly less evolved with each successive life. And consequently, our problems repeat in deepening spirals as our karma becomes more convoluted. If you suffered from childhood or relationship trauma in this life, then your next life might be relatively carefree. But because of the law of invariance, you will likely be born as somebody who is inclined to abusing others the same way your enemy abused you in this life. Thus, in the life after your next life, you will have to pay for the repeated action, or the mimicked action. But this time, the cost will be even greater, because the egos have accumulated even more. It's very sad. But this is how nature works. This is the nature of samsara. To repeat. The more we feed our desires, the more we will have to pay in the end. But, however, life wouldn't have to be so difficult for us if we weren't so bad as a species. If we weren't so degenerated. It's just really bad for us, in particular, because the humanities on other planets don't suffer as much as we do. Patanjali's 8-limbed Ashtanga Yoga Sutra reveals to us a universal set of steps that any person will inevitably fulfill if they succeed in experiencing yoga, the union with reality, our true identity, regardless of the tradition they follow. This is because the 8 limbs of yoga are rules that accord to the laws of nature. It is important to understand that nature has a tendency to predispose people with uneven psychological energies based on our 3 brains or centers. The 3 centers are motor instinctual, often combined or otherwise known as the sexual center, the emotional center, and the intellectual center. For this reason, Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita teaches 3 to 4 different types of yogas so that the practitioners can combine practices in order to rebalance their 3 brains. One kind of yoga is called karma yoga, in which we act in an upright way and perform good deeds in order to produce beneficial results that help to liberate us from suffering. Physical action originates from the motor instinctual center. Some of the fruitful results from karma yoga include alignment, in which we've created the causes that allow life to flow more conveniently and smoothly, in alignment with what we are looking for. When we are out of alignment, we face inconveniences that slow our progress. It is through karma yoga that we earn spiritual experiences and wisdom. People with an abundance of motor instinctual energy have no problem following observances and performing deeds as part of karma yoga. These people have a strong sense of moral responsibility and act with integrity. But being a master of routine can sometimes lead to repetitiveness, which is a sign of spiritual stagnation. When energy becomes stagnant, it is because a person's actions are not producing results that are strong enough to be felt. It would be beneficial for the motor instinctual person to think outside the cave monk lifestyle and review their routine every now and then to see if there are things that should be done differently or more efficiently based on the changing times. Or if there are new practices or areas of study that would benefit their routine, such as esoteric medicine or mantras for concentration and protection. A common characteristic of motor instinctual people is their more or less cold-blooded nature. These people have a great degree of emotional control and resilience, but require heavier and longer-lasting ordeals in order to understand what it feels like to live with grief and sorrow. Another kind of yoga is called bhakti yoga, which teaches us how to handle and reintegrate our emotions in order to conquer suffering. Our emotions originate from our heart. Some of us are very emotional and expressive, but we usually react as opposed to respond. This means that we're not very self-aware or cognizant of how we handle our emotions. Others have a habit of suppressing or even repressing emotions because we don't know how to express ourselves or because we are worried about what others will think of us. In both cases, though, the reintegration of the emotional center is necessary. If you indulge in your emotions a lot, then you need to observe them more and learn to be indifferent. If you ignore your emotions all the time, then you need to catch yourself whenever you casually sweep aside a difficult situation without tending to any possible inner conflicts that arose inside you, because those neglected emotions can build up over time and even cause physical problems down the road. So it would be good to investigate in meditation how neglecting your emotions has played a role in the problems you have today. Many physical problems like indigestion come from imbalances in the emotional center. Emotionally dominant people tend to have strong morals and a high level of faith in their practice. But potential imbalances include physical laziness, which can slow their progress with karma yoga, a neglected intellectual center, which leads them to struggle with problems that could otherwise be resolved or reduced with reasoning, or having a routine that is slow and inefficient because they don't have a thorough understanding of Dharma, or because they're not using the tools available to speed up and multiply their results. In this day and age, we can take advantage of publishers, radio, SoundCloud, and YouTube to help spread a message. A third kind of yoga is called jnana yoga. This kind of yoga assists us in reasoning and comprehending our problems intellectually. Our brain produces thoughts, but our intellect is not limited to just that organ. Someone who is intellectually dominant can learn and understand scripture and the teachings of yoga quickly and easily, but they may lack the will to regularly put what they learn to practice. Or they can have trouble understanding other people's problems because they have this habit of rationalizing and reasoning through the common struggles that many of us face. These people are very clever at making up excuses as to why they don't need to feel grief or upset over difficult situations, or follow observances and practice things like karma yoga. They also tend to be emotionally inexperienced because their lives lack suffering. Raja Yoga, or Ashtanga Yoga, is the fourth and most holistic and complete form of yoga because it engages and integrates all three brains, or centers, of the human being. It is through the complete yogic practice that we awaken consciousness and attain the royal union with divinity that is promised. As explained earlier, the last limbs of Ashtanga Yoga are meditation. Yoga has its foundation in the first two limbs, yama and niyama, as both of them contain essential ethics that are necessary for fruitful results. Ethics are important because many of our behaviors contradict spirituality. For example, it is not possible to eliminate laziness in meditation if we don't first develop the habit of doing things and getting things done. Similarly, it is also not possible to eliminate addictions in meditation if we don't first make the effort to restrain desires and habits. The results of yoga and meditation are directly proportional to the level of diligence one puts into their ethics. If our ethics are poor, the results in meditation will be shallow and limited. Without major changes to our habits and the way we use our attention, meditation will never become effortless or accessible at will. The first limb is yama. Yama means control or restraint, and it refers to self-restraint. It consists of 5 ethical behaviors that we adopt that are conducive to spiritual development. The first yama is ahimsa. Many words in Sanskrit that begin with a mean no or non-something. In this case, ahimsa means non-violence or without harm. It is the attitude of kindness and respect that we must maintain with all living things in order to develop compassion. By restraining selfishness such as pride, anger, or greed, we can thus better see with right view so that compassion can blossom. The second yama is satya, which means truthfulness. We must always tell the truth so that we don't create complications in situations and harm others out of lying. We should also be honest with ourselves so we can continually face our problems and egoic defects without denial or delusion. The third yama is asteya, which means no stealing. Many of us don't steal in the materialistic sense, but most of us steal in more subtle ways. We steal work hours when our boss isn't at the restaurant to see how long we are taking to close down. We steal time and energy from people when we are constantly sending them silly video shorts on social media, or when we insist to our friends to stay out longer, to hang out with us longer. The fourth yama is brahmacharya, which means pure conduct. It specifically refers to chastity and sexual purity. Brahmacharya, practiced properly, means to retain your essence by abstaining from sex, masturbation, orgasm, and lustful thoughts. It is important to realize that even feeding lust through mere fantasy will delay spiritual progress, because lust is the most powerful animalistic ego and does not belong to conscious kingdoms of evolution. The more we feed lust in any way, the longer it stays with us, and the longer it will take to eliminate. This is why we experience wet dreams, because the more we feed ourselves with impressions during the day, the more they show up again and repeat themselves mechanically in our dreams. The orgasm is the most powerful release of energy that we can express at one time. Therefore, it is necessary to abstain from the orgasm and conserve our vital energy in order to get the most out of our spiritual practice. Eventually, as we progress, we will find it useful and necessary to gather more energy by utilizing tantric sex. This is because once we manage to eliminate about 50% of our ego, we will need to harness more energy than we can produce on our own in order to achieve complete self-annihilation. Since there is a strong relationship between sex and energy, more will be explained later when we go over the step pranayama. The fifth and final yama is aparigraha, which means non-greed or non-attachment. This step is renunciation. Initially, we can start by developing the attitude of non-attachment with all of our enjoyments and possessions, and giving up some activities and items, especially the things we do or have in excess. Eventually, we must renounce all desires. Buddhas and bodhisattvas do not have desire, and that is why they have more time and energy in the day to serve others. The second limb of Ashtanga yoga is niyama, and just like yama, this limb contains 5 aspects. The first one is saucha. Saucha means cleanliness and purity. So we need to keep our body, our home, our workplace, our speech, and our thoughts clean and pure. When we indulge in impure impressions from the external world, our internal world also becomes tainted. And that's part of the reason why we experience nightmares and wet dreams. The second niyama is santosha, which translates as gratitude or contentment. Gratitude can arise more naturally when we get used to the yama aparigraha, non-greed. When we give away all the material things we don't need and give up all the activities that are consuming our time, we learn to appreciate what we do have and live happily with less. Developing santosha and aparigraha together also helps us overcome envy. The third niyama is tapas, which literally means heat or passion. So traditionally, it denotes asceticism and practices for developing self-discipline and resilience, such as fasting, solitude, and deep meditation. Much of the exercises in Shaolin Kung Fu and Shaolin Buddhism are tapas because of the severity and attitude one must have when practicing, and the amount of resilience one must develop in order to perform the exercises. At a deeper level, there is also an aspect of tapas that doesn't involve our conscious effort of carrying out exercises of austerity, and that is our karma. When we show our inner being through our intention and our actions that we are serious about liberation, our will gets acknowledged, and we are served the karma we owe as ordeals. So tapas is the attitude we need in order to accept and pay our karma in an upright and constructive way. We need to accept our problems and inconveniences as ordeals and opportunities for spiritual growth. When we stop resisting our pains and we pay more attention to how we react, we can recognize our specific defects and begin to understand our karma. And this is a major 180-degree shift in attitude from modern people, and especially Westerners, because most creatures in nature are ignorant of cyclic existence. So everyone thinks that the best way to live life is to pursue pleasure and avoid uncomfortable situations all the time. But it's wrong from a spiritual standpoint, and we lack resilience because of it. None of us like to suffer or have our perfect, ideal life ruined by some tragedy that took years out of our childhood or youthhood. But for those of us who understand spirituality, we have to keep in mind this crucial aspect of niyama. Because when you think of it, if that childhood trauma or phase of bad events in the past had never happened to you, what would you meditate on? How would you be able to comprehend suffering at a deep and emotional and experiential level? You wouldn't have anything serious to meditate on. Tapas means to receive our ordeals with courage and gratitude. In the book Tarot and Kabbalah, Samael Aun Waor explains the tapas attitude that we should have toward our problems and karma. He says, the law of karma is indispensable in order to orient the ship of our life through the different levels of life in a positive and edifying manner. Karma is a medicine which is given for our own good. Unfortunately, instead of people bowing reverently before the eternal living God, they protest, blaspheme, justify themselves, foolishly excuse themselves, and as Pilate, wash their hands. With such protests, the karma is not modified or reduced. On the contrary, it becomes harder and more severe. When one comes to this world, one brings one's own destiny. Some are born on a feather bed, others in misfortune. In our past experience, we killed. Now they kill us. If we wounded, now we are wounded. If we stole, now we are robbed. And by the rod of which we measure others, so we will be measured. We demand fidelity of our spouse, when ourselves have been adulterous in this or in previous lives. We ask for love when we have been heartless and cruel. We seek compassion when we have never been able to understand anyone, when we have never been able to learn to see another's point of view. We desire immense happiness when we have always been the cause of much unhappiness. We would have liked to be born in a very beautiful home with many comforts, when in past experiences we did not know how to provide a home and beauty for our children. We protest about being insulted when we ourselves have always insulted those around us. We want that our children obey us when we never knew how to obey our parents. Slander annoys us terribly when we have always defamed others and filled the world with pain. Gossip makes us angry. We do not want anyone to say anything about us. Nonetheless, we went about spreading gossip and rumors, speaking ill of our fellow man, causing other people lives of distress. That is to say, we always demand that which we have not given. The fourth niyama is svadhyaya. Sva means self, and dhyaya means inquiry or self-examination. So the term can be translated as self-study. Traditionally, svadhyaya is the study of scripture, but it also includes engaging one's consciousness through active self-reflection and observation, especially when circumstances are triggering the dualities of the mind, such as temptation and aversion. Through introspection, we train ourselves to notice our inclinations and tendencies, to see where we are out of balance. Studying scripture helps us understand phenomenon intellectually, and we receive some comprehension through that. But intellectual understanding is limited, and so is the memory that the ego or subconsciousness carries. So self-study allows us to comprehend things at an emotional and experiential level, because we are observing our three brains or centers in this process. Enlightenment is a matter of understanding or comprehension in all the levels of the mind and centers of the human machine. So it is not solely scripture or meditation that leads us to liberation. It's understanding. When we truly comprehend a problem, our understanding has reached a conscious degree such that we are granted the execution of an ego. This kind of understanding changes the quality of our mind fundamentally and is never forgotten, even after death, because we've destroyed a portion of our ego and karma. The fifth niyama is Ishvara Pranidhana. Ishvara means Lord, but it refers to the Lord within all of us, the divine human being. Pranidhana means devotion or surrender, or to remember or perceive. So the combination of words often translates to surrender to God. But more specifically, it means to surrender oneself to the inner divinity within. The way this is taught in traditions is through something we call self-observation, or self-remembering, or mindfulness, or vigilance. Ishvara pranidhana means to surrender to the circumstances in life whilst maintaining self-awareness or mindfulness. The evolutionary level of the mind of most humans is about 97% conditioned by the subconsciousness, what are known as aggregates in Buddhism. This reflects the amount of karma we've accrued from previous action. Our desires, attachments, and aversions hypnotize us into a passive state of consciousness that easily gets distracted. The ability to concentrate and maintain mindfulness on a moment-to-moment basis is a mandatory prerequisite for meditation. The reason is simple. If you can't pay attention to what you're doing and maintain awareness of yourself during the day when you're awake, you won't be able to do it when you're meditating. The Ishvara, or inner divinity, is the spark of consciousness in our heart that allows us to concentrate and self-remember. It must be trained and developed. The difference between hypnosis, or psychological sleep, and mindfulness is the difference between driving a car and knowing that you are driving a car, and closely observing yourself doing it. This is more than just being a witness to phenomenon. This is observing yourself as a witness of a phenomenon. The added self-observation and self-awareness, with the ability to not get distracted, is a quality of consciousness and skill for us. Self-observation is an act of conscious will, so it does not involve intellectualization, organization, judgment, or personal preference or attachment. Consciousness that is not modified by the ego has a cold, objective, vivid, alert, self-aware quality. That is why it is important for us to remember ourselves from moment to moment, because in that act, we are mimicking that conscious quality throughout the processes of daily life. The third limb of Ashtanga yoga is asana. Asana means seat, and so it refers to carrying oneself with a good posture at all times, especially during hatha yoga and meditation. For these latter exercises, our posture needs to be in equipoise. It needs to feel relaxed, but not dull or drowsy, and attentive, but not strenuous or uncomfortable or restless. Asana also means to keep the mind in the same way, stable and relaxed, but attentive. The fourth limb is pranayama. Since the word pranayama comes from the root prana, the complete sense of the term means energy control, so it is not limited to pranayama breathing exercises. Prana is the primordial, creative sexual energy that flows through all things to sustain life and vitality. It exists very close to the physical world in the fourth dimension, the etheric plane, or the vital plane. The sexual energy is the greatest power that is available to us, and we have the choice to use it in either an upright way or an inverted way when we act on our ego. Think about it this way. The human body is made up of about 7 octillion atoms, which is an inconceivable number. And the body is also supported by vital energy. But splitting just one of those atoms can create an explosion as large as the atomic bomb that was dropped in Hiroshima. There's nothing that has more potency and reach than pranic energy. Prana affects us more than any other kind of energy we use. Physical tension blocks the flow of vital energy, and mental tension or anxiety also blocks this flow. Oftentimes when we are anxious, our breathing changes and we either breathe faster or shallower or hold our breath. But we need energy to live and have experiences in meditation. So we must learn to conserve energy and live more efficiently. Hatha yoga, pranayama breathing, reciting mantras, mindfulness, and saucha, or cleanliness, all help us in gathering and conserving energy. Saucha, cleanliness, is important because we expend energy on whatever we place attention on. So we shouldn't waste our energy on impure or useless things. This is how we keep our heart and mind pure. Now, since we live in modern times, it's hard to avoid seeing impure things all the time, out on the street, on television, the music we listen to. So this is when Ishvara Pranidhana comes into play again. If we are mindful and self-observing at all times, then we won't get as affected, carried away, or identified by negative impressions that do come our way, since we are observing everything with cognizance and indifference. This saves energy, because when we are mindful, we are reducing stress hormones in the body and racing thoughts. The fifth limb of niyama is pratyahara, which means withdrawal. This means to withdraw all the senses from everything. This includes physical sensations, thoughts, and emotions. Pratyahara is a distinct state of consciousness where the mind has become more stabilized and relaxed to the point where our perception of external things becomes abstract and we withdraw into the mind. This is what we experience just before we fall asleep, when we are drowsy. The mind begins to receive hypnagogic imagery, which is in fact our intuition expressing itself and communicating to us. This is what clairvoyance really is in the authentic sense, because clairvoyance means clear seeing. Intuition can arise in many forms. We can receive it as a thought that suddenly intervenes between our usual, deliberate thoughts. Or we may hear it as a voice of someone we know who is part of our life currently and somehow relevant to us. Or in deeper states, we will see symbolic dream imagery. For this reason, pratyahara is the beginning of real meditation, because it is a state in which we can begin to investigate problems and understand them objectively. When you're starting off, it's very important to at least be able to reach pratyahara on a regular basis. Because if we as modern people are constantly confused and stressed and bombarded with problems, and we need clarity and we need to understand what to do right away, then we shouldn't have to wait months or years just to develop the skill to enter a dhyana or samadhi state in meditation at will and handle our problems that way. We need answers right now, don't we? For most people, pratyahara doesn't come unless you are drowsy or almost falling asleep. So it is crucial to remember this. A good asana or posture that is very relaxed but attentive enough so you don't fall asleep is ideal. However, if you're new and you put too much emphasis on getting that perfect traditional meditative posture in your practice, then it will take you some time for your body to adjust and become comfortable enough to allow for pratyahara to happen. My personal suggestion is to experiment by sitting upright in different ways, on a comfortable chair, on your bed with pillows stacked up, or my personal favorite, a reclining chair. Yeah, it's easy to fall asleep on a reclining chair, but it's also the easiest way to become drowsy and experience pratyahara. A good time to meditate is either first thing in the morning, upon waking up, or before bed, since at both times we are drowsy. If you find that you fall asleep easily, you will need a more attentive posture. I know of a Gnostic who is an instructor, and he likes to drink coffee before he meditates. And I personally like to do the same thing because it helps to extend my drowsiness without falling asleep. But after some success with these techniques, I encourage you to try this without coffee or without using the reclining chair, but in a traditional meditation posture. Because that way you don't rely on those supplements and certain kind of furniture just to experience something that has really nothing to do with the body. As with everything the yogi does, the state of pratyahara is complete when we maintain self-awareness. Our consciousness should never be in a passive state. Pratyahara is the same thing as the Buddhist term vipassana. The sixth limb is dharana. Dharana is the state of consciousness in which we are able to sustain undivided concentration for as long as we want. The development of this ability comes from the fifth niyama, Ishvara Pranidhana, which, as explained earlier, is self-observation or mindfulness. The more we engage our consciousness on a moment-to-moment basis, the more we awaken it. Without a foundation in concentration, meditation becomes a constant struggle between attention and distraction. The seventh limb is dhyana. Dhyana means meditation or absorption, and is often described as one-pointed concentration. This is a state of consciousness in which our concentration is perfectly fixed and completely absorbed on a single point or subject. It is characterized as a radiant self-awareness that feels both limpid and transparent, and yet vivid, with a quality of pureness and sometimes luminescence. Consciousness exists in infinite degrees, so in traditions, dhyana is characterized into various levels, or jhanas. Through dhyana, the eighth and final limb of yoga, samadhi, can be experienced. As explained by Swami Shivananda, yoga is the union with reality, or our true nature, since the term comes from the root word to join. So samadhi is the complete experience of yoga itself. This union with reality is explained in the first 3 lines of the Royal or Ashtanga Yoga Sutras. Patanjali explains that yoga is the suspension of the modifications of the mind. Then the seer, the yogi, rests in her own nature. In Buddhism, our true nature is referred to as a seed or embryo in the heart region called Tathagata Garbha. And like a seed, it is undeveloped in us and not yet the full expression of our Buddha nature. Samadhi meditation provides us the full experience. Samadhi is a profound state of consciousness in which our mind is temporarily liberated from all of its egoic conditioning, and we experience what we call ecstasy or bliss. The level of concentration and self-awareness is just as strong as dhyana, but there is the added feeling of profound happiness, freedom, and love. At this level of meditation, we perceive our true nature and see all things as they are, objectively. Similar to the state of pratyahara or vipassana, samadhi is a deeper state in which we can investigate and understand any problem or phenomenon truthfully, without misperception. As with dhyana, samadhi exists in levels. In high levels of samadhi, there is the ability to perceive emptiness, or shunyata in Buddhism. This is the intrinsic emptiness of all forms in the universe. Everything perceived at this level is void of terrestrial value, meaning, and relevance, but love and compassion remain. Since the consciousness is liberated from all of its conditioning in samadhi, suffering does not exist. As such, high samadhi states lend us the power to withstand anything, both physical and psychological. The path to self-realization is a great work that leads us from suffering to bliss, and finally, into emptiness, liberation.